When you think of the best vocalists of all time, who comes to mind first? Only if you're a true purist will you catch every word of Gladys Knight. Despite all that she accomplished, her demise is a grisly tale for some. Everything that transpired leading up to Gladys Knight's tragic demise will be discussed in today's video, which focuses on the Queen of Soul. On May 28, 1944, in Atlanta, Gladys entered this world, marking the beginning of her journey. She was lucky to have two parents, Sarah Elizabeth Gladys and Merrill Woodlow Knight SR, who was a postal worker back then. Her large and happy family of 6 comprised her late brother Merrill Knight Jr., Bubba and sister Brenda, as well as David Knight, Billy, and his brother David. It was supposedly Gladys that she changed her name when she entered the industry, rather than the one she was given at birth. Just so you know, the reason she was given the name Gladys when she was born is something we'd like to clear up. We have given you the truth, yet it's logical that people might think such because her name is so distinctive. I bet you're asking how she knew that music was her life's work. In order to address it, let's delve into her early years. The love of music in her family had a profound impact on her and her siblings as they grew up. From an early age on, Knight's life revolved around music. Her parents' participation in the gospel choir Wings Over Jordan stoked a fire of enthusiasm within her. As a little girl of 4 years old, it made a profound impression on her as she first sang gospel music at night at Mount Moriah Baptist Church. This was only the start of a legend that, as the story's protagonist matured, would motivate countless people. She began performing with the Morris Brown College Choir at school and church functions when she was 7 years old, further solidifying her passion of music. As soon as they heard the tremors of fate in her voice, everybody understood that this young black girl was not like them. She was going to surpass all of their wildest expectations in terms of size. Even though her musical career kicked off at her brother Bubba's birthday party in 1952, she won a singing contest called the Original Unprofessional Hour at the tender age of 7 by performing a Nat King Cole song. Their music player had broken, but they were determined that the malfunction would not ruin their celebration. The 4 of them, Bubba, Brenda, Eleanor, and William, decided to form a singing group. Elizabeth Knight was astounded to see how these youngsters, who were clearly not old enough to read or tell a fib, managed to do so well. In her opinion, they were fantastic, so she suggested they form a band. This is due to the fact that any amateur could play at their level with enough practice, but the actual issue is that they had never sung in such a group before and understood they could do much more as a unit. In honor of their relative Pip, James Wood, they dubbed it the Pips. At first, Gladys Knight and the Pips showed the world their magic in and around Atlanta, and the locals were on board with them because the city had a long history of music. Here they discovered a plethora of venues to showcase their extraordinary abilities. Going there was necessary to guarantee the town's undying devotion to them. And they did this by beginning to play at gatherings, churches, and clubs in the area. Their charismatic live performances and infectiously positive music helped them gain a reputation over time. The crowds adored their early concerts because of the unadulterated energy they contained. The distinctive sound of the Pips was a fusion of the soaring melodies of gospel with the pulsating tempos of R&B. The Pips were contracted to Brunswick Records in 1957 after they became famous through winning Atlanta talent events. Knight was already performing alongside legendary names like Jackie and Sam Cooke before she was even a teenager, as we can see when we consider this. They likely considered it a rewarding experience when their 1957 first album with Brunswick bombed. Despite their best efforts, they were all crushed to the core. They welcomed their cousins Edward and Langston to the group, claiming that the bump had no effect on them. They went on to have a string of consecutively successful 1960s seasons, thanks in large part to this succession. What was it in their performances, nevertheless, that won over their earliest admirers? When you consider that they founded their band at a time when dozens of bands were receiving daily recognition, the issue naturally arises. Their genuine enthusiasm and the genuine happiness they brought to their performances were what initially captivated their audience. There was more to the Pips' music than just catchy lyrics. As vibrant, authentic, and passionate individuals, their music mirrored those qualities in them. Perhaps the secret to their meteoric rise to fame on Atlanta's music streets was their remarkable talent at connecting with listeners. The 1961 recording of Gladys Knight and the Pips' iconic single "Every Beat of My Heart" was a watershed moment in the group's career. It launched them to stardom on a national level, not merely making them famous. Their path to success, however, was marred by obstacles, as is the case with every youthful group of their day. Record labels proved to be a formidable obstacle for the ensemble, mirroring the experiences of many artists of the time. The absence of backing from larger labels forced them to make do with meager advertising and distribution funds, which ultimately led to this outcome. But when you give it some thought, when did things really start to change to the point that My Every Heartbeat became public knowledge? A little Atlanta label named Huntum Records chose to promote the track, and that was the sole reason they were successful. For the uninitiated, VJ Records was a major independent label during that time, and they were able to strike a distribution deal with them. The deal was a watershed moment in their career because it expanded the song's listeners. The tempo of My Heartbeat began to increase at an exponential rate. It peaked at number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100 when it became immensely popular. Because of this enormous success, the group's music could be heard on every radio station in the state. Every Beat of My Heart's #1 position on the charts was unprecedented, particularly for a band like the Pips in their early days, and it heralded a sea change in direction for Gladys Knight and the Pips. It was a daring effort to target the music industry's eternally wealthy core. It had to have been New York City. When the opportunity to sign with Fury Records presented itself, they hit yet another milestone. This shift wasn't your average rebranding. It was a dramatic shift that launched them to the forefront of the music industry. They couldn't have expanded their reach without signing with Fury Records, but it was an essential stage in their process. Due to the fact that they first met Bobby Robinson here, to them he served as a kind of guide. He was a guide who saw potential in them and helped them develop it. The crew had all the critical tools they needed while working under the owner's watchful eye. Most significantly, they were able to get the exposure they needed to develop as artists, and they also discovered useful tools here. Here, under the Fury Records name, they re-recorded Every Beat of My Heart, giving the song a fresh sound and boosting its popularity. In 1966, the Pips came to terms with their meteoric rise to fame and decided it was time to step it up a notch and compete at the highest level. That is exactly what happened when Gladys Knight and the Pips signed with Motown Records in 1966. They entered a world populated by some of the most famous musicians of that era. Because Motown was more than simply a record company, few people understand how monumental an event it would have been if two companies had joined together. An entire generation's music was composed by this cultural giant. Even though the Pips had never had it so good, this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity presented a daunting challenge. They had to build their reputation from the ground up. They were already well known and extremely popular, so you might be asking why that is. The truth is, they were famous. Okay, but a star the size of our sun standing amidst a constellation of stars. During their early days at Motown Records, they were cast as newcomers or underdogs amidst a world of long-standing musical legends. Contrary to popular belief, the Pips were not a timid bunch. They were even more driven to prove themselves and take their place among music's all-time greats as a result of this misconception. I Heard It Through the Grapevine, their legendary single, was the breakthrough that eventually paid off. It came out in 1967 and featured Gladys's strong vocals supported by the Pips' lively backing. The song was an enormous hit, reaching #1 on the charts and cementing its place as an anthem for that time. Gladys Knight and the Pips went from being unknown newcomers at Motown to one of its most successful and lucrative performers with the release of another smash hit, I Heard It Through the Grapevine, right as people were starting to fear that they were going to stop. Their distinct place in Motown history was quickly established. Greater than any amount of money could have bought, the prospects presented by their song's success were invaluable. They were able to tour with the most legendary hits, Diana Ross and the Supremes, thanks to the notoriety they received from their achievement. However, difficulties were what they received instead of glory and chances. Their rise to prominence in the cutthroat music industry was sparked by this tour. Several accounts indicated that their riveting performances captivated the crowds to the point that they overpowered the headliner or primary event. They had a tense and challenging touring experience because of this, and they had to find a way to combine the Supremes' respect with their own growing popularity. When Gladys Knight and the Pips decided to switch record labels in 1973 from Motown to Buddah, it was a watershed moment in their career. Because of this choice, they would go on to have even more success in the mainstream. Motown was not paying them enough and had too many constraints on their creative freedom, so they wanted out. This led them to decide to move. The fact that Motown was instrumental in making them famous is obvious, but what really set them apart was the freedom to express themselves artistically that Buddah Records provided. This is why their career at this point is so instructive for aspiring artists. It details the band's strategic progression and their quest for creative freedom. At Buddah Records, Gladys Knight and the Pips recorded some of their most famous tunes, which would go on to become just as legendary as the band itself. Midnight Train to Georgia stands out as a prime example. The lyrics of the song were particularly tragic because they described the pain of speaking about love and sacrifice, that it began to reside in the minds of all its devotees. Not only did it reach the pinnacle of the US charts, but it also topped charts around the world. The Pips went from being celebrated as national rock stars to being renowned as international superstars, all because of this song. They carried on with their business beyond midnight and released another huge hit. Gladys sang lead vocals while the band smacked her. That was the basic structure of this song. Thanks to the smashing success of these singles, Gladys Knight and the Pips were elevated to the status of superstars. They had risen to the level of musical heroes, reaching new heights on the music industry's gantry. Their star began to rise in tandem with the global recognition of their music. Thanks to their work in soul and R&B, they shot to stardom and became idols to the masses. All of this was occurring in the 60s and 70s when racial tensions were at an all-time high, and you guys have no idea. In addition, there was the era when women were seen as nothing more than domestic implements whose sole purpose was to care for the home and its children. All of these folks looked up to Gladys Knight because she was a genuine star. No matter how bad things become, they looked up to her as proof that you should keep looking up, because opportunities will inevitably come knocking and ask, what do you want on that particular day? You must act independently and pursue your desires. That is the message that the Pips and Gladys Knight conveyed to all. Their music transcended ethnic and racial boundaries, attracting a wide array of devoted listeners. Multiple Grammy Awards were bestowed upon the group during this time in appreciation of their efforts, talent, and influence on the music business. Gladys Knight contributed to the 1985 AIDS benefit single That's What Friends Are For alongside Dionne Warwick, Stevie Wonder, and Elton John while she was still a member of the Pips. It was a Grammy-winning smash that peaked at #1 3 times. Knight even performed on stage with Patti LaBelle and Dionne Warwick in the 1986 HBO special Sisters in the Name of Love. The third and most successful solo album by Knight, Good Woman, was published at the MCA in 1991 and debuted on the R&B album list. The album also included Babyface's Superwomen, a Grammy-nominated single that included Dionne Warwick, Patti LaBelle, and Warwick. During the same year, Knight and LaBelle worked together on the sardonic duet I Don't Do Duets, which belied its moniker. In 1991, during the opening game of the World Series, Knight performed the national anthem. Her 1995 solo effort, Just For You, was nominated for Best R&B Album at the Grammys and earned gold. Oh, that's not all. Singing the Lord's Prayer and His Eyes on the Dog, Knight sang at Michael Jackson's 2009 funeral and was featured on the soundtrack of Lee Daniels' film The Butler. You and I Ain't Nothin' No More was written and produced by Lenny Kravitz, and it was recorded by Knight in 2013. When asked about the issue of women in the entertainment industry selling sex, she expressed her wish that they will speak out and stop in an interview from 2014. This was due to her confession that the trend was troubling her and her subsequent realization that she needed to don't take it off, wear it when dressing for public appearances. Among VH1's 100 Greatest Women, Knight stands head and shoulders above the rest thanks to her many accomplishments. Gladys, as is well known, had a contentious personal life full of challenges and errors. However, it was precisely these setbacks in her private life that ultimately contributed to her fame and fortune in the music industry. But what exactly was it that had made her life so unbearable? We'll have to see. Hold your horses. Gladys Knight's alleged infidelity is just one of several charges against her. They weren't all wed at once, after all. James Newman was Gladys' first husband, and she was married to him before the others. Gladys' union with James began at the tender age of 16, and they were married shortly after. Because of her early marriage to an HR, she avoided several opportunities that would have helped her advance in her job. They tied the knot at a pivotal point in her life, right when she was beginning her career in music. Most people don't know this, but their relationship was more than simply a love union. It was also a partnership that began when they were both young adults, just starting out in their ever-expanding careers. Their marriage had its fair share of difficulties, as do all marriages. We all know how deeply a mother loves her kid, and Gladys Knight was no different. However, her first miscarriage, which occurred early in their marriage, crushed her heart and soul. Despite the terrible tragedy she endured, she gathered her strength and persevered to become a mother of 2 lovely children. It would seem that having these children would have saved their marriage, but in reality they had a very rocky road together. Newman began doing drugs after the Gladys became somewhat wealthy as a result of their success. Knight was abandoned as a young mother of 2 after her husband's addiction caused him to quit their family. Sadly, Knight decided to take a break from her career and briefly stopped performing live around this period. Her selfless sacrifice of her ideal job to care for her children is indicative of the exceptional mother she was. Over time, Knight's musical passion and the demands of parenthood brought her back to the recording studio, where she performed with the Pips. After a protracted separation of several years, Knight took the tough choice to divorce James Newman in 1973. Although Newman's story came to a close with his divorce, it was cut short a few years later when he passed unexpectedly. However, it appears that Knight's life had greater plans as she rekindled her love life and wed Barry Hankerson in Detroit in 1974. Hankerson founded Blackground Records, which made him a famous figure. His presence added depth to her life, and on August 1, 1976, they became parents for the first time to a boy, Shanga Ali Hankerson. However, a contentious custody fight led to their 1979 divorce. You should also know that Knight's love for her stolen son was so great that she spent over $1 million trying to find him. She wed the motivational speaker the next year, 1995, but they later divorced in 1997 after further separation. William McDowell was her husband at last in 2001. As well as a combined total of 17 grandkids and 10 great-grandchildren. For more than a decade, Knight battled an addiction to gambling, which was one of the most scandalous aspects of her profession. She joined Gamblers Anonymous after losing $60,000 in one night at the baccarat table in the late 1980s, which is hard to imagine but helped her overcome the habit. Having been a Baptist for some time, then a Catholic after her children converted, she was baptized into the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in 1997. Prior to that, she had been a Catholic. We all know that she has always had a cheerful disposition, yet she did mock LDS President Gordon B. Hinckley by saying that his followers should make their songs more upbeat. The Saints' Unified Voices, a Grammy-winning gospel music chorus, was formed as a result of his agreement. In subsequent years, Knight presided over the B1 choir at the B140th anniversary commemoration of the revelation of the priesthood ceremony. As the years go by, Gladys Knight will soon be in her 80s, but her impact on the music industry will last forever, touching the lives of millions and inspiring future generations. Her incredible career, which lasted for over 30 years, is far from over. Among the few veteran performers who have weathered the storms of Hollywood's constant reinvention, she stands out. Nobody recognizes the thousands of stars who were formerly considered her peers. There aren't many people who can still win over millions of people's hearts like Gladys. She has maintained her status as an influential and esteemed figure by her ongoing artistic contributions as well as her previous accomplishments. She isn't living the life of your dreams, even though you'd assume she would be, given her celebrity status. It's incorrect. Her current way of life is quite disheartening. Controversies and legal struggles abound throughout Knight's latter years. In 2016, Knight borrowed $45,000 to rescue her son's restaurant. A group home in Georgia sued her, saying she didn't pay back the money. Oh, that's not all. Speculation about the old star's fortune and estate has made it so that she cannot relax. Everyone she meets appears to be overly materialistic and interested solely in her fortune, which continues to trouble her. Having a ton of money doesn't mean anything if you can't enjoy it, does it? All of these thoughts that make Gladys end up miserable must be there when she wakes up.